Get off my way, you dirty cleaner.
A loud voice roared through the quiet morning. A shiny white BMW was racing straight toward the company gate. The driver had spotted the big puddle near the sidewalk and was aiming right for it. The BMW slammed into the puddle hard. Dirty, muddy water shot up into the air like an explosion. It crashed down on Victoria, a young black woman in a cleaning uniform covering her completely. The nasty water soaked through her clothes, splashed all over her face, and dripped down from her hair in thick, brown drops. Her small lunch bag got ruined, and her cleaning supplies went flying everywhere. She was just trying to get to her cleaning job. But the woman driving the car, Madison Blake, a wealthy white woman, had other plans. Madison smiled meanly. This was her chance to put someone in their place. Madison hit the brakes hard and rolled down her dark window. You could see her perfect makeup and expensive sunglasses. Her bright red lipstick shined as she laughed loud and cruel. "Maybe now you'll learn to get out of the way," she yelled, her voice full of nasty joy. "This is what happens when people like you don't know where you belong." Victoria just stood there, covered in mud and dirty water. Water dripped off her chin onto the ground. Her wet uniform stuck to her body, making her feel embarrassed and small. But her eyes stayed calm, even though you could see anger building up inside them. Madison wasn't finished with her performance. "Welcome to Sterling Tech, cleaning lady," she shouted before gunning her engine and speeding toward her executive parking spot. Victoria didn't move. She didn't speak. She simply stood there, memorizing every word, every laugh, every cruel detail of what had just happened. Other employees arriving for work stared in uncomfortable silence. Some looked away in shame, others smirked and whispered among themselves. But Madison Blake had no idea what she'd just done. The woman standing there, covered in mud and humiliation, wasn't just any cleaning lady. She was Victoria Sterling, the billionaire founder and CEO of Sterling Tech. The building Madison worked in, the salary she collected, the executive parking spot she was claiming, everything belonged to the woman she just destroyed. Victoria picked up her muddy bag and continued walking toward the entrance. Her shoes squelched with every step, leaving dirty footprints on the pristine sidewalk. She was about to begin the most eye-opening day of her life, and Madison Blake was about to learn that there are some people you should never, ever cross. The mud was still dripping from her uniform as she walked through those company doors. And Madison Blake had absolutely no idea that she just declared war on the most powerful woman in Texas. As we delve into the story, if you stand against prejudice and support justice, hit the subscribe button, type justice, and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. The woman standing there, covered in mud, trying to wipe the dirty water from her face, was Victoria Sterling. At 35 years old, she was one of the most powerful women in America, though you'd never know it by looking at her right now. Victoria had built Sterling Tech from absolutely nothing. 20 years ago, she was a single mother working 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. She'd clean office buildings at night, work data entry during the day, and code websites on weekends, all while raising her daughter alone. But Victoria had a gift for seeing the future before anyone else did. Back in 2005, when everyone thought social media was just a fad, Victoria was already building the algorithms that would power the next generation of tech platforms. She started Sterling Tech in her tiny apartment with a borrowed laptop and $1,500 in her checking account. The first year, she made just enough money to buy groceries. The second year, she hired her first employee. By year 5, she was worth $10 million. By year 10, it was $100 million. And now at 35, Victoria Sterling was worth over $3 billion. Sterling Tech wasn't just another company. It was the backbone of the internet. She employed over 15,000 people across 12 countries, and her headquarters in Austin was considered one of the most innovative workplaces in the world. But success had created a problem Victoria never expected. The higher she climbed, the further she got from the people who actually made her company run. She'd started hearing whispers about mistreatment of lower-level employees, about executives who thought they were untouchable, about a culture that was rotting from the inside. Victoria had built her company on the principle that every person mattered, regardless of their position. The idea that some of her employees might be abusing others made her sick to her stomach. She hadn't been present in her company for 3 years, as she was outside the country taking professional courses. Now, she was back, but no one knew, so she'd made a decision that would have shocked her board of directors. She was going undercover as a cleaning lady. For the past 3 weeks, Victoria Sterling, Billionaire CEO, had been showing up to work as Vicky, a quiet woman who cleaned floors and emptied trash cans. She made sure her disguise was placed so one would recognize her, which worked perfectly. Only one person knew the truth, Marcus Thompson, her head of security, who was helping coordinate the secret investigation. Madison Blake was everything Victoria despised about corporate culture. At 38, Madison was Sterling Tech's vice president of marketing, and she carried herself like she owned the place. Madison had grown up in Highland Park, one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Dallas. Her father was a federal judge, her mother sat on the boards of 3 major charities, and Madison had never, not once in her entire life, faced a real consequence for her actions. When Madison joined Sterling Tech 3 years ago, she'd immediately set about creating her own little kingdom. She surrounded herself with people who wouldn't challenge her, promoted those who praised her ideas, and made life miserable for anyone who dared to question her methods. Madison believed the world was divided into 2 types of people: those who mattered and those who served the people who mattered. In her mind, cleaning staff, security guards, and administrative assistants fell firmly into the second category. Madison drove a $70,000 BMW that she'd leased with her corporate credit card. She lived in a downtown Austin high-rise that cost more per month than most people made in a year. She wore designer clothes, carried $1,000 handbags, and never ever let anyone forget that she was important. Standing nearby, watching the whole mud incident with growing horror, was Angela Rodriguez. At 29, Angela was one of the brightest minds in Sterling Tech's analytics department. She'd grown up in San Antonio, the daughter of parents who'd immigrated from Mexico with nothing but hope and determination. Angela's father worked construction, her mother cleaned houses, and they'd sacrificed everything to make sure their daughter could go to college. Angela had watched Madison Blake's rise through the company with increasing concern. She'd seen how Madison treated people she considered beneath her, and it made Angela's stomach turn. Growing up watching her parents work multiple jobs to survive had taught Angela that every job had dignity. Every person deserved respect, and that your position in a company hierarchy said nothing about your worth as a human being. There was something different about Vicky, though Angela couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. The woman carried herself with a quiet confidence that was unusual for someone in her position. Angela had started to wonder if there was more to Vicky's story than met the eye. Then there was Robert Chen, Madison's closest ally and biggest enabler. At 52, Robert was Sterling Tech's executive vice president, and he was everything that was wrong with middle management. Robert had watched Madison's mud splash incident from his car and had actually laughed out loud. In his mind, it was exactly the kind of thing that kept people in their proper places. But the most important person in this whole story, besides Victoria herself, was Marcus Thompson. At 35, Marcus was Sterling Tech's director of security, and he was one of the few people in the building who truly understood what the company was supposed to represent. Marcus was also one of the very few people who knew Victoria well enough to recognize her even in disguise. When she'd approached him 3 weeks ago with her plan to go undercover, Marcus had been skeptical. He'd warned her that what she discovered might be worse than she expected. But he'd also agreed to help, because he'd seen enough to know that there were serious problems in the company culture that needed to be addressed. For 3 weeks, Marcus had watched Victoria endure treatment that would have made him quit on the spot. He'd seen her clean up messes that other people had deliberately made worse. He'd watched her be ignored, dismissed, and treated like she was invisible. But nothing had prepared him for this morning's incident. When he'd seen Madison Blake deliberately splash mud all over his boss. 20 minutes later, Victoria was pushing a cleaning cart down the executive corridor when she heard Madison's voice echoing from the main conference room. What she heard next made her blood run cold. Victoria realized that her undercover investigation had revealed something far worse than she'd expected. This wasn't just about a few bad executives. This was about a fundamental failure of leadership. She'd been so focused on innovation and growth that she'd lost sight of the culture she was creating. She'd delegated too much authority to people who didn't share her values, and she'd created systems that allowed cruelty to flourish unchecked. Over the next few hours, Madison Blake began what could only be described as a systematic campaign of harassment designed to break Victoria's spirit completely. And Victoria, maintaining her cover as Vicky, was forced to endure every humiliating moment while documenting the abuse that was happening right under her own roof. It started small, the way workplace bullying always does. Madison would walk past Victoria's cleaning cart and deliberately knock over the carefully organized supplies, then stand there with her arms crossed, waiting. "Clean this up," Madison would command, her voice loud enough for nearby employees to hear. "And this time, try to do it right." Victoria would quietly pick up the scattered bottles and rags, biting her tongue as Madison watched with obvious satisfaction. But Madison wasn't content with small victories. She needed an audience for her cruelty, and she was about to get one. Around 10:30 that morning, Madison cornered Victoria in the main hallway, right outside the marketing department, where a dozen employees could witness what was about to happen. "Excuse me," Madison said, her voice dripping with fake politeness. "I think you missed a spot." Victoria looked at the floor she'd just finished mopping, which was spotless. "I'm sorry, ma'am." "Where exactly?" Madison pointed to a completely clean section of tile. "Right there. It's filthy. Clean it again." Victoria knew this was a test, a deliberate humiliation designed to establish dominance. She also knew that every person watching this interaction was learning something about what was acceptable behavior at Sterling Tech. So she got down on her hands and knees and began cleaning the already perfect floor. But Madison wasn't finished. As Victoria scrubbed, Madison continued her verbal assault. "You know, some people just don't have what it takes to work at a company like this," she announced to the growing crowd of onlookers. "They think showing up is enough, but they don't understand that excellence matters here." Victoria's jaw tightened, but she kept scrubbing. Around her, she could hear whispers and nervous laughter from the employees who were watching. Some looked uncomfortable, but no one spoke up. "I mean, look at this," Madison continued, gesturing toward Victoria like she was an object rather than a person. "This is exactly why we need to reconsider our staffing decisions. When people don't take pride in their work, when they don't respect the company they work for, it affects everyone." Robert Chen appeared from his office, drawn by the commotion, and immediately understood what was happening. Instead of discouraging Madison's behavior, he decided to join in. "You're absolutely right, Madison," Robert said, his voice carrying across the hallway. "Standards matter. When we let things slide, people start thinking mediocrity is acceptable." Victoria finished cleaning the spotless floor and stood up, her knees aching from the unnecessary scrubbing. She looked Madison directly in the eyes, and for just a moment, Madison seemed to falter under the intensity of that gaze. But then Madison's cruelty kicked back in, stronger than before. "Don't look at me like that," Madison snapped. "You should be thanking me for helping you improve your work quality." And that's when Victoria realized that Madison wasn't just a workplace bully. She was someone who genuinely enjoyed inflicting pain on people she considered powerless. This wasn't about establishing workplace hierarchy or maintaining standards. This was about a fundamental lack of human empathy. Over the next hour, Madison enlisted other executives in her campaign of harassment. She sent Victoria to clean the same bathroom 3 times, claiming it wasn't up to standard. She had her reorganize supply closets that were already perfectly organized. She found fault with every task Victoria completed and made sure to criticize her loudly enough for others to hear. But the worst part wasn't the impossible tasks or the public humiliation. The worst part was watching other people join in or stay silent. Victoria was witnessing the systematic erosion of the company culture she'd spent 20 years building. Kevin Walsh from sales started leaving messes deliberately in areas he knew Victoria would have to clean. Sarah Mitchell from HR began speaking about Victoria as if she wasn't there, discussing her performance issues with other managers while Victoria was standing right next to them. Even employees who seemed uncomfortable with the harassment didn't speak up, too afraid for their own jobs to risk challenging the executives. Victoria documented everything. She memorized names, noted specific incidents, and began building a comprehensive picture of how far the toxic culture had spread. But with each humiliation, each cruel comment, each moment of deliberate cruelty, her anger grew stronger. This was her company. These were her employees. And people like Madison Blake had turned it into something ugly and cruel. By noon, word of the morning's events had spread throughout the building, and Victoria realized that Madison's harassment campaign was becoming a form of entertainment for some employees. People were actually coming to watch when Madison started berating the cleaning lady, treating it like it was some kind of show. That's when Victoria knew she needed to see how deep this rot went at the highest levels of her company. The quarterly board presentation was scheduled for 2 o'clock, and Victoria knew that Madison would be presenting. As the company's founder and CEO, Victoria normally would have been running this meeting. But today, she was going to experience it from a completely different perspective. Victoria arrived at the boardroom 30 minutes early to set up coffee and water for the executives. It was surreal, preparing refreshments for a meeting about her own company while wearing a cleaning uniform and being treated like she was invisible. The board members began filing in at exactly 2 o'clock. These were some of the most powerful business leaders in Texas, people who controlled billions of dollars in investment capital and influenced the direction of dozens of major companies. Victoria had worked with these people for years, had negotiated deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars with them, had earned their respect as an equal. Now she was standing in the corner of the room, holding a coffee pot, and not one of them even glanced in her direction. Madison entered the room like she owned it, her presentation materials perfectly organized, her confidence radiating in every step. She'd clearly been preparing for this moment, and Victoria realized that the morning's harassment hadn't been random cruelty. It had been a calculated demonstration designed to support the arguments Madison was about to make. Victoria moved quietly around the room, refilling coffee cups and trying to make herself invisible while straining to hear every word. As you know, Sterling Tech has always prided itself on being an employee-friendly company, Madison continued. But I think we need to ask ourselves whether that philosophy is actually hurting our competitiveness in today's market. Victoria's hands tightened on the coffee pot. Madison was about to use the values that Victoria had built the company on as an argument for destroying them. This morning, I had a perfect example of exactly what I'm talking about, Madison said, clicking to her first slide. One of our cleaning staff showed a complete lack of respect for company property and workplace hierarchy. When I tried to address the situation professionally, this employee became argumentative and defensive. Victoria almost laughed at the audacity of Madison's lie. The lack of respect had been Victoria walking to work. The professional addressing had been deliberately splashing her with mud. And Victoria had never said a single argumentative word. But the board members were nodding thoughtfully, accepting Madison's version of events without question. This incident made me realize that we have a fundamental problem with accountability among our support staff. Madison continued. These employees have become too comfortable, too entitled. They don't understand that this is a business, not a charity. Robert Chen leaned forward, playing his role perfectly. Madison, what specific changes are you proposing? Madison smiled, clicking to her next slide. I'm recommending that we outsource all janitorial, maintenance, and food service positions to external contractors. This would immediately save us $2.3 million annually, but more importantly, it would reestablish appropriate workplace hierarchy. Victoria felt sick to her stomach. The numbers on Madison's slide were completely fabricated. She knew because she actually understood the company's finances. The real savings would be minimal, and the hidden costs would be enormous. But Madison was presenting fiction as fact, and no one was questioning her data. Dr. Patricia Williams, one of the board's longest-serving members, raised her hand. Madison, how many employees would be affected by this change? 37 full-time positions, Madison replied without hesitation. But these are easily replaceable positions. The contractor we're considering can have new staff in place within a week. Victoria was standing right behind Dr. Williams, refilling her coffee cup, when she heard the board member mutter under her breath. 37 families right before the holidays. That seems harsh. But Madison had anticipated this objection. Patricia, I understand the concern, but we have to remember that business is about making tough decisions. These employees have had ample opportunity to prove their value to the company. The fact that they haven't suggests that perhaps they're not the right fit for Sterling Tech's culture of excellence. Victoria realized that Madison had constructed a perfect logical trap. She'd created a narrative where firing hardworking employees became a matter of maintaining standards, where cruelty became professionalism, where destroying lives became sound business strategy. And it was working. Victoria could see the board members nodding, accepting Madison's twisted logic because it was presented with confidence and wrapped in business jargon that made it sound reasonable. That's when Angela Rodriguez's voice cut through the room like a knife. Excuse me, Angela said from her seat at the junior staff table. I have some concerns about the data being presented. The room fell dead silent. Junior analysts were supposed to observe board meetings, not participate in them. Angela was violating protocol, and everyone knew it. Madison's expression turned dangerous. Angela, this isn't the appropriate forum for your input. But Angela had clearly decided that some things were more important than protocol. With respect, Madison, you're asking the board to make a decision based on incomplete information. I've analyzed the real costs of outsourcing these services, and the numbers don't support your conclusions. Victoria held her breath. This young woman was risking her career to challenge Madison's lies, and Victoria had never been more proud of an employee. Madison's voice turned ice cold. Angela, you're overstepping your boundaries in a very serious way. I'm going to give you one chance to sit down and be quiet. But Angela didn't back down. The contractor you're proposing has a turnover rate of 340% annually. The hidden costs of constant retraining, reduced service quality, and security risks actually make this proposal more expensive than our current staffing model. Plus, you're talking about firing 37 families 3 weeks before Christmas. The room erupted in murmurs as board members processed this information. Victoria wanted to cheer, but she forced herself to remain invisible in the corner. Madison stood up, her presentation temporarily forgotten. Angela, you're clearly not ready for this level of professional responsibility. I think we need to seriously discuss whether you belong in this room at all. The threat was clear and public. Victoria watched as other junior employees shifted uncomfortably, understanding that Angela's career was being destroyed in real time for the crime of telling the truth. But then something beautiful happened. Dr. Patricia Williams cleared her throat and spoke up. Actually, I'd like to hear more about Angela's analysis, she said firmly. If there are concerns about the financial projections, we should address them before making any decisions. Madison's face went white. She'd expected the board to automatically side with executive leadership, but Dr. Williams was one of the most respected voices in the room. "Patricia, with all due respect, we can't let junior staff dictate board policy," Robert said quickly. "No one's dictating anything," Dr. Williams replied. "But we can't make informed decisions based on incomplete information either. Angela, do you have documentation to support your concerns?" Angela pulled out a tablet and began presenting data that Victoria knew was absolutely accurate. As the young woman spoke, Victoria felt a surge of pride that almost brought tears to her eyes. This is what Sterling Tech was supposed to be about: people standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult. But Madison wasn't finished. As Angela presented her counter-analysis, Madison began a campaign of subtle intimidation designed to undermine her credibility. She rolled her eyes, whispered to Robert, and made small sounds of dismissal that were clearly audible to everyone in the room. When Angela finished her presentation, Madison immediately went on the attack. "Well, that was certainly comprehensive," Madison said, her tone making it clear that comprehensive was not a compliment. "But I think we're missing the bigger picture here. Angela's analysis focuses entirely on short-term costs and completely ignores the long-term benefits of establishing proper workplace standards." Madison clicked back to her original presentation, but now Victoria could see it with new eyes. Every slide was designed to dehumanize the employees she was targeting, to make firing them seem not just reasonable, but necessary. "The incident I witnessed this morning was just one example of a larger problem," Madison continued. "When employees don't respect company hierarchy, when they think they can challenge management decisions, when they believe their jobs are guaranteed regardless of their performance, that's when you get the kind of entitled behavior that hurts our bottom line." Victoria realized that Madison was now using Angela's courage as evidence for her original argument. The young woman's willingness to speak up for her coworkers was being twisted into proof that employees needed to be controlled more strictly. "I'm not just proposing a cost-cutting measure," Madison concluded. "I'm proposing a cultural reset that will ensure Sterling Tech remains competitive in an increasingly challenging market." The board discussion that followed was painful to watch. Most of the members seemed genuinely torn between the financial arguments and the human costs, but Madison had framed the debate in a way that made cruelty seem like good business. Victoria stood in the corner, invisible to the people who were deciding the fate of 37 families, and listened to her own company being dismantled by someone who had completely perverted everything she'd tried to build. But the worst was yet to come. As the meeting began to wind down, Madison made one final argument that hit Victoria like a physical blow. "I want to leave you with one final thought," Madison said, her voice taking on the tone of someone delivering profound wisdom. "Sterling Tech has always prided itself on being different, on treating employees better than other companies do. But maybe it's time to ask whether that approach is actually helping anyone." Madison gestured toward the corner where Victoria was standing with the coffee pot. As the meeting ended and board members began filing out, Victoria realized that her undercover investigation had revealed something far worse than simple workplace harassment. Madison Blake wasn't just a bully. She was a predator who fed on power and used corporate systems to justify cruelty. But Madison had made one crucial mistake. She'd assumed that the quiet cleaning woman in the corner was powerless, that her humiliation would go unnoticed and unpunished. She had no idea that every word she'd spoken, every cruel comment she'd made, every lie she'd told had been heard by the one person in the building who had the power to end her career instantly. Victoria Sterling was done being invisible. It was time for Madison Blake to learn what real consequences looked like. If you were in Victoria's shoes, what would you have done? Reveal yourself and fire Madison, or keep shut about the matter? Tell us in the comments and hit the subscribe button to enjoy more stories like this. The final straw came at 4:30 that afternoon when Madison Blake decided to stage what she clearly thought would be her greatest triumph yet. Victoria was cleaning the main lobby when Madison appeared with Robert Chen and a small crowd of executives and junior staff. "There she is," Madison announced loudly, pointing at Victoria like she was directing a performance. "Our star employee." Victoria looked up from the windows she was cleaning, immediately recognizing the cruel gleam in Madison's eyes. This wasn't going to be another small humiliation. Madison had something bigger planned. "I've been thinking about our conversation this morning," Madison continued, her voice carrying across the lobby and drawing the attention of everyone in the area, "about workplace standards and knowing your place. And I realized I wasn't clear enough in my message." Victoria set down her cleaning supplies, sensing that whatever was about to happen would be the final test of her ability to maintain her cover. "Get down on your hands and knees," Madison commanded, her voice echoing off the glass walls. "I want you to clean this entire lobby floor properly this time." Victoria looked around the lobby. The floor was spotless. She'd mopped it just an hour earlier. But this wasn't about cleanliness. This was about power. About humiliation. About Madison's need to prove that she could break anyone she considered beneath her. "Ma'am, the floor is already clean," Victoria said quietly. Madison's eyes lit up with predatory excitement. "Are you arguing with me? Are you actually standing there, arguing with a senior executive?" The crowd around them was growing larger. Victoria could see employees from multiple departments gathering to watch the spectacle, some looking uncomfortable, others clearly entertained by the drama. "No, ma'am," Victoria replied. "I'm just saying that I already cleaned this floor." "Well, I'm saying it's not clean enough," Madison shot back. "And since I'm the executive and you're the help, my opinion matters more than yours. Now get down on your hands and knees and clean it again." Victoria felt something snap inside her chest. For 3 weeks, she'd endured insults, harassment, and deliberate humiliation. She'd watched her employees be mistreated and her company values be perverted. She'd listened to lies being told about people who couldn't defend themselves. And now Madison Blake was demanding that she crawl on the floor of her own building, while dozens of her own employees watched. But Victoria also realized that this moment was exactly what she'd been waiting for. Madison had just crossed a line that even her supporters would find difficult to defend. This wasn't workplace discipline. This was pure sadism, performed in public for maximum humiliation. So Victoria got down on her hands and knees and began scrubbing the already perfect floor. "This is where you belong," Madison announced to the crowd, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "On the ground where I can see you, where everyone can see what happens when people don't understand their place in the world." As Victoria scrubbed, Madison continued her verbal assault, each word carefully chosen for maximum impact. "You see? People like this think they deserve respect just for existing," Madison said, gesturing toward Victoria like she was an object in a museum. "They think showing up is enough, that effort counts for something. But the real world doesn't work that way. The real world has hierarchies for a reason." Victoria could hear whispers from the crowd, and for the first time she sensed that Madison might have pushed too far. Even some of Madison's usual supporters looked uncomfortable with this level of public cruelty. That's when Angela Rodriguez pushed through the crowd. "Stop it," Angela said, her voice shaking with anger. "Just stop it. This is wrong." Madison turned toward Angela with the expression of a cat who'd just spotted a mouse. "Excuse me?" "I said stop it," Angela repeated, her voice growing stronger. "This is harassment. This is abuse. And it needs to stop right now." The lobby fell completely silent. Everyone understood that Angela was risking her career for the second time in one day, but this time it was even more dangerous. She wasn't challenging Madison's data or analysis. She was challenging Madison's right to treat another human being this way. Madison's face flushed with rage. "Angela, you are way out of line. I'm going to have security escort you out of this building. And then I'm going to make sure you never work in this industry again." But Angela didn't back down. "Fine. Fire me. But I won't stand here and watch you torture someone just because you can." Victoria felt tears in her eyes, but not from humiliation. She was crying because Angela Rodriguez, this young woman who barely knew her, was willing to sacrifice her own career to defend someone she thought was powerless. "Security," Madison called out. "I need security in the lobby immediately." That's when Victoria made her decision. She'd seen enough. She'd learned everything she needed to know about what her company had become and about who the real leaders were among her employees. Victoria stood up slowly, dirt and cleaning solution dripping from her hands. She looked Madison Blake directly in the eyes and spoke in a voice that carried across the entire lobby. "That won't be necessary." Then Victoria pulled out her phone and sent a text message to Marcus Thompson. "Enough. Boardroom. Now, emergency board meeting in 10 minutes. Madison laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the glass walls. "Are you serious? You think you can call board meetings? You're a cleaning lady." Victoria didn't respond. She simply walked toward the elevator, leaving her cleaning supplies in the middle of the lobby floor. "Where do you think you're going?" Madison called after her. "I didn't dismiss you." But Victoria was already stepping into the executive elevator, the one that required a special key card to access, the one that only went to the executive floors. Madison's laughter died in her throat as she watched the elevator doors close. For the next 7 minutes, chaos reigned in the Sterling Tech lobby. Madison was trying to explain to her gathered audience why a cleaning lady had just walked into the executive elevator. Robert Chen was frantically trying to call security. Angela Rodriguez was standing in the middle of it all, looking confused but relieved that the horrible spectacle had finally ended. Meanwhile, Victoria was in her private office on the 42nd floor, changing from her cleaning uniform into the charcoal gray business suit she kept in her executive closet. She looked at herself in the mirror, seeing Victoria Sterling for the first time in 3 weeks instead of Vicky the cleaning lady. Her phone was buzzing with confused text messages from board members. An emergency meeting had been called, but no one knew why. Marcus Thompson was handling the logistics, making sure everyone would be in the boardroom in exactly 10 minutes. Victoria took a deep breath and prepared to step back into her real identity. For 3 weeks, she'd been invisible, powerless, voiceless. Now it was time to remind everyone exactly who Victoria Sterling was. Down in the lobby, Madison was still trying to maintain control of the situation. She'd convinced herself that whatever was happening, it had nothing to do with the cleaning lady who'd just disappeared. Probably just a coincidence that an emergency board meeting had been called right after her perfect demonstration of workplace hierarchy. "All right, everyone, show's over," Madison announced to the crowd. "Let's get back to work. And if anyone sees that cleaning woman, tell her she's fired." Madison was actually feeling quite proud of herself as she made her way to the boardroom. She'd handled the situation perfectly, shown clear leadership in dealing with an insubordinate employee, and demonstrated to everyone watching exactly what happened when people didn't know their place. She was still riding that wave of satisfaction when she walked into the boardroom and saw a woman in an expensive business suit sitting at the head of the table. Madison's face went completely white. Standing there, no longer in a cleaning uniform, but wearing a suit that probably cost more than Madison made in a month, was the woman she'd been torturing for 3 weeks. But that was impossible. Cleaning ladies didn't sit at the head of boardroom tables. Cleaning ladies didn't call emergency meetings. Cleaning ladies didn't. "Hello, Madison," Victoria said, her voice calm and professional. "I'm Victoria Sterling, founder and CEO of Sterling Tech, and you're fired." Madison's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. No sound came out. Her brain was trying to process information that didn't make sense, trying to reconcile the powerless woman she'd been abusing with the billionaire sitting in front of her. That's impossible," Madison finally managed to whisper. "Sit down, Madison," Victoria said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that Madison had never heard from her before. The boardroom was filling up with confused executives and board members, all trying to understand what was happening. Robert Chen stumbled into his usual seat, his face pale as he began to realize the magnitude of what had just occurred. Victoria stood up, commanding the attention of everyone in the room. "For the past 3 weeks," she began, "I have been working undercover as a member of our cleaning staff. I wanted to see firsthand how our employees treat each other when they think no one important is watching." The room erupted in whispers and shocked exclamations, but Victoria continued speaking. "What I discovered was worse than I ever imagined. I witnessed systematic harassment, deliberate cruelty, and a complete perversion of everything this company was supposed to represent." Madison was hyperventilating in her chair, her face cycling through expressions of shock, terror, and desperate confusion. "Madison Blake," Victoria said, turning to face her directly, "you have spent 3 weeks deliberately tormenting someone you thought was powerless. You splashed mud on me, humiliated me in public, created impossible tasks designed to break my spirit. And just 20 minutes ago, you forced me to crawl on my hands and knees in our lobby while dozens of employees watched." Victoria clicked a remote, and the wall-mounted screen came to life. Security footage began playing. Footage of the mud splash incident, the harassment in the hallways, the cruel comments, and finally, the degrading spectacle in the lobby. "But worse than your treatment of me," Victoria continued, "was your plan to fire 37 hardworking families just to pad your profit margins. You lied to this board about the financial benefits, you manipulated data to support your conclusions, and you tried to destroy the career of Angela Rodriguez simply because she had the courage to tell the truth." The security footage was damning. Every cruel word, every deliberate humiliation, every moment of calculated cruelty was captured in high definition. But what made it even worse was the audio, hearing Madison's voice as she explained to other executives that these people need to understand hierarchy and that she was teaching important lessons about respect. Madison finally found her voice. "Victoria, I had no idea. If I had known who you were." "Stop," Victoria said, her voice cutting through Madison's desperate backtracking like a knife. "That's exactly the problem. You treated me that way because you thought I couldn't fight back. You thought I was powerless. The fact that you would treat any human being the way you treated me tells me everything I need to know about who you are." Madison tried again. "I was just trying to maintain workplace standards." "You were trying to feed your own ego by crushing someone you thought was beneath you," Victoria replied. "And the tragic thing is, you convinced yourself that cruelty was leadership, that humiliation was management, that breaking people's spirits was good business." Victoria turned to address the entire room. This company was built on the principle that every person matters, regardless of their position. That talent and character are more important than background or connections. That success should lift everyone up, not just the people at the top. The room was dead silent, except for the sound of Madison's labored breathing. "Madison Blake, your employment with Sterling Tech is terminated immediately. Security will escort you from the building, and our legal department will be in touch about the harassment lawsuit that will certainly follow." Madison made one last desperate attempt to save herself. "You can't do this. I have a contract. I'll sue. You'll what?" Victoria asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "You'll try to explain to a judge why you thought it was acceptable to torture an employee for 3 weeks? You'll argue that forcing someone to crawl on the floor was appropriate workplace management?" Marcus Thompson appeared at Madison's side along with 2 other security officers. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us," Marcus said, his voice professional but firm. As Madison was escorted from the room, still babbling about contracts and lawsuits, Victoria turned her attention to Robert Chen. "Robert, your behavior over the past 3 weeks has been equally disappointing. You enabled Madison's cruelty, participated in her harassment campaign, and showed no leadership when it mattered most. You're also fired." Robert teared up immediately, seeing his career flashing before his eyes. But Victoria wasn't finished. She had one more important piece of business to address. "Angela Rodriguez," Victoria called out, and Angela stepped forward from where she'd been standing near the back of the room, still trying to process everything that had just happened. "Angela, you showed more courage and integrity in the past few hours than most people show in their entire careers. You risked your job twice today to defend people who couldn't defend themselves. You challenged lies with truth and stood up to bullies even when it would have been easier to stay silent." Angela's eyes filled with tears as Victoria continued. "Effective immediately, you're being promoted to Senior Vice President of Workplace Culture and Employee Advocacy. Your first task will be to work with me to implement new policies that ensure nothing like this ever happens again at Sterling Tech." The room burst into applause, and Angela looked like she might faint from shock and relief. Victoria spent the next few minutes outlining immediate changes to company policy. Mandatory sensitivity training for all executives, an anonymous reporting system for workplace harassment, regular culture audits to ensure that the company's values were being lived, not just posted on walls. But most importantly, Victoria announced that she would be spending 1 day per month working alongside employees at every level of the company, ensuring that she never again lost touch with the people who made Sterling Tech's success possible. As the meeting ended and people began to file out, Victoria made one final announcement. "I want everyone to understand something," she said, her voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. "Leadership isn't about having power over people. It's about using whatever power you have to lift people up, to create opportunities, to make sure that everyone in this organization feels valued and respected." Victoria paused, thinking about the past 3 weeks and everything she'd learned. "Madison Blake thought she was teaching me about my place in the world. But the truth is, she taught me something much more important. She taught me that our company's culture is only as strong as our commitment to protecting the most vulnerable people in our organization." 6 months later, Sterling Tech was a very different place. The toxic culture that had been growing like cancer through the organization had been systematically identified and removed. Employee satisfaction scores had reached all-time highs. Productivity was up, turnover was down, and the company had become a model for how successful businesses could treat their employees with dignity and respect. Madison Blake had indeed filed a lawsuit claiming wrongful termination. It lasted exactly 3 weeks before her lawyers advised her to drop it and disappear quietly. The security footage of her behavior was so damning that no jury would have sided with her. Angela Rodriguez thrived in her new role, implementing programs that transformed Sterling Tech into one of the most employee-friendly companies in America. She never forgot the lesson she'd learned about the courage required to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. And Victoria Sterling? Every month she kept her promise to work alongside employees at every level of the company. Sometimes she worked in customer service, sometimes in accounting, sometimes in maintenance. But once a month, she could be found in the cleaning department, working alongside the 37 families that Madison Blake had tried to destroy. Because Victoria Sterling had learned something that Madison Blake never understood. True leadership isn't about being above other people. It's about standing beside them, lifting them up, and making sure that everyone has the dignity and respect they deserve, simply because they're human. The woman who thought she was humiliating a powerless cleaning lady had actually given Victoria Sterling the greatest gift of her career. The reminder of who she really was and what her company was supposed to represent. And that's a lesson that transformed not just Sterling Tech, but everyone who worked there, for the better. If you enjoyed the story, like, subscribe, and share with others so they can learn too. See you in our next video.